Greetings to those of you known as Peace United Church of Christ. May the peace of Christ be with you in this day. My sermon title this morning is Called to Freedom. In the book of Galatians, in this chapter, Paul instructs us to become so loving we live as slaves to one another. For Moses, that meant claiming his original identity and choosing the desert over the palace. For privileged people like John and Abigail Adams, often separated because of his service to the nation, it meant doing without so a greater good could be served. For Harriet Tubman, it meant returning to the South again and again after she had escaped to lead 300 other enslaved souls to freedom. To Dietrich Bonhoeffer, it meant finding the courage to stand against the evil which took his life. As he was organizing poor people, Martin Luther King Jr. also elevated this kind of love, writing, "This love might well be the salvation of our civilization. This is why I am so impressed with our motto, freedom and justice through love. Not through violence, not through hate, no, not even through boycotts, but through love." From Pharaoh to Pontius Pilate to the present day, conventional wisdom, strong arms, and massive wealth have epitomized the globalization model. Scripture's revolutionary response has always been provided by our prophets, both biblical and contemporary. Where the world says wisdom, might, and wealth matter, our God says steadfast love, justice, and righteousness make you my follower and make for a just world. Loving enough to establish a social safety net is as old as Deuteronomy, where freedom is elevated as the wealthy are told to release their enslaved after their 7th year of captivity. Freedom is elevated as farmers are instructed to allow the land to rest and lay fallow every 7 years. Freedom is elevated again and again as the triad of the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner dwelling in the land are well cared for. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love, become slaves to one another. Yet it is Pharaoh's greedy, acquisitive spirit which continues to guide the power brokers of our day. As Bill Moyer said at one of our general synods, we clearly have a government for the few at the expense of the many, while some of our evangelical siblings have turned Jesus into a guardian of privilege, a militarist, even a lobbyist. We are not exempt from self-examination. We privileged white folk have been so paralyzed by the horrors and traumas of the slavery our forebears pressed on black bodies that we have not been able to entertain the notion of completely giving ourselves over to the service of another as if we were their slaves. We are so selfish. We have not been able for more than 2 centuries to entertain the notion of seeking equity for those disenfranchised by our systemic racism. Establishing a way to repent and provide meaningful reparations would be an action of those who are slaves to love. In our current health crisis, some of us are so vain and selfish, we are not even willing to wear a face mask to protect the health of others. With our self-serving behavior, We have reduced our celebration of our nation's freedom to fireworks and flags, watermelon and good times, despite the calling of our still speaking God, who has told us what the Lord requires of us: to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with our God. On October 11th, 1798, John Adams spoke at the commissioning of the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Division of the Massachusetts Militia, saying, "We do not have a government capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, and licentiousness would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Where does that leave us today? Too many of our state, our nation's leaders yield to what Paul has described as our most base impurities, from impurity, decadence, and idolatry, to enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissension, and factions. Paul is not concerned about the sweet by and by. Paul writes of a this-world liberation, a liberation which sets us free to exalt our communities with love and joy and peace and self-control. The politics of truthfulness and kindness aren't hopefully naive. They are, as Adams notes, the foundations of a society structured around liberty and justice for all. The Bible's primary message of redemption focuses on how we live in community, love your neighbor as yourself, and how nations are called to follow and serve the living God. As Jesus journeyed from town to town, he spoke of seeing political and economic justice for the poor, of giving cups of cold water, and talked more about money than any other single topic. Jesus knew that freedom was more than not being enslaved. It is for freedom Christ has set us free. Freedom is elevated as we reject economic policies grounded in individualism, favoring the accumulation of wealth for a few to the detriment of the many. Freedom is elevated as we speak the truth about racism, sexism, and classism, and the way each has trampled on civil rights. Freedom is elevated as we name the importance of moral responsibility and reject the evil of political corruption, calling for integrity in all of our elected officials. Freedom is elevated as we reject the notion that peace is achieved and safety established through gun ownership or military might. Freedom is elevated as we work to protect the earth from the stripping of her resources and the pollution which destroys creatures, soil, and seas. John and Abigail Adams, Harriet Tubman, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Bill McKibben, all true freedom fighters, because all were driven by this commitment to God above country loyalties, above party loyalties, above personal profit. We Christians are not alone in our struggle to redeem this fallen society, but we are uniquely equipped and challenged to reset America's moral compass, because our allegiance is to the one who challenges us to become revolutionary love slaves. Can we do it? Can we give ourselves over to revolutionary behavior, resisting the very structures that make us wealthy and powerful? Can we so enslave ourselves to love that we work as if driven by another to serve the needs of the poor and the disenfranchised? Can we elevate freedom for the cause of Christ? Only with the courage of those beautiful fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Thanks be to God. Amen.